So good afternoon. I am Isaiah Fudge. I am the Director of Positive Youth Development Policy and Advocacy here at Advocates for Children of New Jersey. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn session on social emotional character development and how it impacts youth mental health. If you're unfamiliar with us, ACNJ is a statewide nonpartisan independent advocacy organization, and our goal is to ensure that every child has the opportunity to grow up safe, healthy, and educated. The goal of this webinar is to really give you a sense of what social emotional character development is and how it impacts youth's mental health. I am delighted to be joined today by Dr. Maurice Elias, who is an expert on social emotional character development. Um, Maurice is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University. Dr. Elias is also the director of the Rutgers Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab. Dr. Elias is also the co-director of the Academy for Social Emotional Learning in Rutgers School at the School of Rutgers. He is a part of the leadership team of Social Emotional Learning for US, so SEL for US and SEL for and J, and he is also the co-author of Nurturing Students' Character Everyday Teaching Activities for Social Emotional Learning. Dr. Elias, thank you so much for joining me and joining us to discuss social emotional character development.
Well, it's my great pleasure. There are fewer things that I would rather discuss than this, so happy to get started.
Yes, yes, thank you. So I guess we can start, or I'll start by asking you to talk a little bit about social emotional character development, and describe what it looks like in practice.
I will start with that. That's a great thing to start with. I also just want to make a note that I just put my contact information into the chat so that if anyone wants to follow up with anything we talk about or raise any questions of things we don't get to cover, people can certainly feel free to follow up with me at Rutgers. I'm more than happy to do that. It's a cliche that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I want to put up a picture for just a moment to talk about what social, emotional, and character development is. Can you see the sailboat on the screen?
Definitely, yep.
All right. So, so think about our kids being on a journey of life, and the boat is what takes them there. And if you think about the journey of life, in order to make that journey, you need skills. Skills are what move us forward in life. They help propel us. It's like the propeller on a ship or the sails, that's what moves us forward. But the question is, what directs us? And what ends up directing us are our values, our character, our virtues. That's the rudder. And the journey of life also requires a destination, a sense of positive purpose. And how the whole thing goes depends on the C's. Now, in this particular drawing, we're focusing on the school climate, but it's also the family climate, the community climate. All that matters. So, when we talk about social, emotional, and character development, we're really talking about the skills and values that kids need in order to steer toward a positive purpose. Now, there's a lot packed into that. Number one that we've learned is that kids need to have a sense of positive purpose. We spend time trying to fix kids, but what we also need to do is inspire kids. Inspire kids to believe that they have a positive purpose, that they come into a school, 180 school days, and they should believe they're there for a good reason. If they don't believe they're there for a good reason, why will they want to learn? And so, social, emotional, and character development is really a way of talking about skills we all have that we're born with them. These are our life skills, our resilience skills. These are things that we need to develop and nurture in all of our kids if they're going to be successful in school and life, and if they're going to find for themselves a positive purpose. So that's why I just wanted to put that kind of picture out there to start with so that we can understand that we're talking about the journey of life here and helping all kids have the tools and the values they need to be successful.
So, Dr. Elias, you're talking about social emotional character development, but there's also another term that is used often, and that's social emotional learning. Can you, well, let me ask this. Can the two terms be used interchangeably? And if not, how do you distinguish?
Well, when I first opened up my lab, it was called the Social Emotional Learning Lab. As we began to understand that implicit in the idea of social emotional learning is the direction that we're going to put these skills to use, we felt that we had to call this social, emotional, and character development. Think of it as SEL 2.0,
Okay.
right? And the skills that we're talking about, just to be clear about it, we're talking about the ability to understand your own emotions. We're talking about the ability to understand emotions in other people. We're talking about the ability to understand what does a situation require, which means understanding of different cultures and contexts. We're talking about empathy. We're talking about compassion. We're talking about the ability to control your strong feelings so that every time you're angry, you don't hit somebody. And to also know the difference between being angry, being annoyed, being frustrated. If you don't differentiate between those two things, you got trouble. These are the skills that enable us to get along in groups. We have all been part of many groups and many teams, right?
Mhm.
If you think about your experience in groups and teams, it is not always the smartest person in the group that you most value as a group member. It's the person who's responsible, the person who listens, the person who's mobilized, motivated, gets things done, keeps their word, respects you. All of those things matter in getting along with a group. And a classroom is a group. If our kids don't have the skills to get along in groups, how can they succeed in classrooms and schools? How can they succeed in teams and clubs? Well, they can't. And the final skill area is being a responsible, ethical problem solver. We don't know what life is going to throw at us, right? We didn't know what was going to happen with the pandemic. It all came back to our problem solving skills, our resilience. So these skills that we're talking about are so basic, so important, and they're implicit in everything that we want to do. In addition to many other things, I'm a licensed clinician. So I've seen a lot of kids and families clinically. And when they come into a clinical setting, just like our kids who end up in detention, or kids who end up in suspension, invariably they have some deficiency in their social emotional skills, usually in emotion management. It's not like there's anything wrong with them, but somewhere along the way, they didn't get the skills that they need to succeed in life and in school. And so it's up to us to think about, well, how are we going to make sure kids get those skills? Not after they get in trouble, before they get in trouble, just as part of growing up, as part of what they experience during the course of a school day. So social emotional learning and character development are really complementary. But at the end of the day, if we want kids to be good kids, they have to believe that they have positive possibilities.
Mm.
They have to believe they're headed somewhere good. They have to believe that their talents are valued and that there are ways for them to make a positive contribution. And that's also something that we neglect. A test score doesn't give a kid a future, but a future can motivate a kid to improve a test score.
Mm.
So that's what this whole area is about. It's about inspiring kids. It's about believing in kids and giving them the skills and the values to be successful.
It's interesting that, and thank you for discussing social emotional learning in tandem with character development. Um, it's interesting because I hear you talking about schools, right? There are so many places that youth occupy, and so many adults that are responsible for young people outside of a school setting. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about um, how do young people and the people who work with them in any capacity benefit from incorporating social emotional character development and SEL practices.
Yeah, I focus on schools because schools are the place where all kids go.
Hmm.
We open up our doors to kids. They deserve the best when they're in there. But one of the most successful social, emotional, and character programs I was involved with was run by actually many years ago by the Hallmark Card Company. They worked with Girl Scouts, they worked with 4-H clubs, and other youth groups. And basically, what they did was they trained the youth workers and volunteers, over 100,000 of them, to build kids' social, emotional, and character development. It's not something that everybody knows about. It's not something that's part of everybody's education. And so in any context, in a group context, in a sports context, in a service context, if the adults know about the importance of these skills and know how to bring them out in the kids, remember, it's a matter of bringing them out in the kids. It's not like the kids don't have the ability to recognize feelings in other people. Of course, they have that ability. We just have to make that ability more accurate and refined. But it's not like we have to give it to them. They got all this stuff already. And so as the adults who work with kids in any setting learn how to do that, their work with the kids gets to be more effective. Another area where this is very, very successful is Special Olympics. Special Olympics has done a tremendous amount of work with helping the volunteers who work with kids with various disabilities learn how to bring out their skills and competencies. And some of these kids have tremendous competencies in social emotional skills. So it's a matter of the adults being on the lookout for this and of course developing the skills to bring it out in the kids.
I wanna be more directly, I wanna I wanna talk more directly about mental health. How does how does incorporating social emotional character development impact young people's mental health?
Right. I don't want to go into the whole historical story here,
Okay.
but the whole idea of what we're talking about emerged from clinical psychology, specifically folks named George Spivak and Myrna Shore, many years ago working at Hahnemann in, in Philadelphia, noticed that the kids that they were seeing in this residential setting were getting into trouble in part because they lacked problem-solving skills and empathy, and they didn't know how to read other people's feelings. And so they would work on these kids, these skills with these kids in the residential setting, and the kids would get very good at it. Then they'd send them home on for leave or passes or holidays, and they would get in trouble again. And they'd come back to the setting and they would rebuild them and they would know the skills. And then when they went home, they would get in trouble again. And so it began to occur to George Spivak and Myrna Shore that the situation was not only with the kids, it was with the settings that they were in, and that the settings needed to do a better job in encouraging kids and believing in these kids' skills. So, believe it or not, George Spivak and Myrna Shore stopped working with adolescents in residential treatment facilities and started working with preschool age kids without any identified problems. And they started with those kids building their skills. The point being that mental health, our mental health, depends tremendously on our social emotional competencies. And the time to strengthen these things is before there's a problem, not only after there's a problem. And so there is a direct connection between these skills and our mental health. I mean, for example, we got a lot of kids now suffering from anxiety and depression.
Hmm.
If you think about what anxiety and depression are, they are in large part an inability to manage our strong emotions, that we say to ourselves things that keep making us anxious or making us feel badly. So when you go to a clinician, what does the clinician do? Well, the clinician gives you the skills that you need to engage in more positive emotions. Why do we have to wait until kids are in trouble to give them the skills they need to engage their emotions effectively? Well, of course we don't. So there's a continuum, and the social and emotional skills are important along that whole continuum. My own view is the sooner we give the kids these skills, the better. The earlier we start and the more we do it, the more mental health difficulties we are going to be able to forestall. We're not going to forestall them all, so we're going to need our clinical services and all that, but we can prevent a good deal of misery if we are able to um, start earlier. But it's the same set of skills. And, kids are more receptive to learning before they've had a negative learning history.
Hmm.
So when we reach kids preventively, we reach them in their clubs and in their groups and on their teams, they're more receptive. And that's the other key part of it. We don't want our kids to be thinking about themselves as having deficits. We want our kids to be focusing on their competencies and on their potential for accomplishment. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. said, everybody can be great because everyone can serve. And that's true. Every one of our kids has a capacity to serve. And in order to learn how to serve well, they need to have social and emotional competencies. And so when we think about preparing kids to be helpful to other people, every kid can do that. Every kid deserves the opportunity to do that. These are the things that we can do, right? We have to help kids be more inspired to do positive things and then learn the skills they need to accomplish those things.
Dr. Elias, I know that you're a busy man and you have to run pretty soon, but I did want to ask you this last question and then leave a little bit of space to take some questions from the audience. So Dr. Elias, can people be taught how to implement effective social emotional character development practices at any point before or during their professional careers? And if so, what's the best way for people to learn those best practices?
That's a long question, right? Um, So let me give you a couple of short answers. First of all, folks might want to check out, and I just put it in the chat, selfornj.org. This is an organization in New Jersey, free of charge for members, where the focus is on building competencies, helping people build their competencies in implementing social, emotional, and character development in different settings. So it's a great place to go for information about how to get better at doing this in your setting. I also put in the chat the link to selinschools.org. That's the Academy for Social Emotional Learning in Schools. It's an online professional development academy where people can earn certificates in social emotional instruction. That's whether you work with kids in schools or in groups in any capacity, as well as a certificate in school leadership, i.e., how to bring SEL into a school and organization. It's a three-course online certificate program that really builds people's expertise in this area. I think one of the reasons I left my contact information is because there's no generic answer. There are specific answers. And if people have specific needs for building their skills and contexts in which they want to do that, and they reach out to me, I can connect them with the right resources. Because I think that's what it takes. It's finding the right resources, the right supports to do this. There's very little that's sort of generic, one size fits all out there. But this is one of the reasons why every potential teacher, counselor, psychologist, school social worker, school administrator should understand social, emotional, and character development as part of their training, so that they don't have to just start learning this on the job. This is very, very basic. No matter how smart you might be, if you can't read words, you're going to have many challenges in your life. And no matter how smart you are, if you can't read people, read feelings, and read situations, you are going to be very, very challenged in your life. And we need kids to have academic and social, emotional competencies if we want them to be successful in life. And it shouldn't be a matter of good luck as to whether those kids meet up with adults who can do that for them. I noticed, by the way, in the chat that someone, Michelle, was asking about research linking SEL and mental health. Please email me at melias@psych.rutgers.edu. Happy to connect you with volumes of information on that topic.